operation on two different clocks when they do a military operation. One is the military clock, how long does the military need to accomplish its objectives. The other one is the diplomatic stroke legitimacy clock, which is how long has Israel got before its allies say we've killed enough people, civilians, you need to stop that please. And they felt that because of the absolute enormity of the casualties they'd suffered when Hamas attacked
26分嚟㗎。嚇？
and I think they've gone into see it from the levels of casualties there. They've gone on using a great deal of force. But I saw estimates in Israel that they think they have a couple more weeks. But I think that the forces are gathering, if you like, amongst their allies, saying you need to change the nature of your military operation. They'll not stop it because, of course, this is not translated.
佢得嚿衫㗎嘛，你着褸㗎嘛。你尋日套戲中唔中意睇嗰個 The Marvels? You like it?
Hayes to the United States Real Madrid, another major European city. That's the roadmap for the manager of the Chelsea women's team, who's confirmed her appointment as head coach of the US national side from next May onwards. While at the same time talking of a fairy tale ending, time at Chelsea with a successful Champions League campaign. Starts this evening in the Spanish capital, will finish the meeting now. Meanwhile, domestic men's football is offering one of those intriguing fixtures in the FA Cup first round replay tonight, involving the football club founded to represent its business just after the First World War, which still plays in a green and white strip to match the livery of its delivery vans. Curiously named Cray Valley Paper Mills is based at the Badgers ground in Nelson, South East London, plays in the Isthmian League South East Division, is the lowest ranked club still in the FA Cup. This evening, it's League One's Charlton Athletic. It's a local derby live on BBC Two, and Barry Moore is Cray Valley's assistant manager. Good morning to you, Barry. Just over morning, what is it now? 1,500 tickets available for tonight. Maybe you could have sold them 10 times over.
Yeah, it's amazing, really. I mean, we had over 2,000 of our away in at Charlton the other Sunday. Our average gate was only just over 100, really. So to get 1,500 packed in our crowd will be fantastic tonight.
I read that you have one covered stand that contains about 100 people. Most of the rest will be braving the weather. They must be a hardy lot, your fans.
Yeah, I think we've got a cover at one end of the ground, not seated, but it's a standing area with cover down one end and then a little bit on the side. So, but I think people get there early to get the 100 seats. I know that.
Yeah. So on top of the 80 to 100,000 pounds I heard you estimating the last time we talked to you from the first round, there's a good deal more, I suppose, to come tonight. How much, I wonder?
Yeah, I mean, we get TV money again, which would be fantastic. Obviously not to the level of the first game, but it's still very, very beneficial to the club. And then gate receipts, merchandise, scarves, and then obviously food and drinks. So all in all, I mean, anything we make from now, or anything we finish from now, will be a massive boost to the club.
Now, I've got to ask you this, what's the pitch like down that way? Disrespectful, but maybe we can put it in level.
To be honest, we've got one of the best pitches in our division. That's what Lee's fantastic. He just breathes through the pitch. So the pitch, to probably a little bit soft. Maybe
哎呀，不。
Supreme Court will pass this morning on whether the governor's plan to send Cincinnati as Joe Biden is lawful. This year, because of the bill concluded, there were too many problems with the lines as asylum system. Refugees somewhere counting that independently finished in Senate. The head of NHS England is promising to wipe out cervical cancer by 2040. Now the Pittman says the disease is on track to be eradicated, and it's through a combination of cervical screening and giving the vaccine against human coronavirus in school.
Jane, thank you very much indeed. It is 27 minutes to 9. In an alternative political universe, the focus of political heat today would be not on the Prime Minister, but on Sir Keir Starmer, who is facing potentially the biggest rebellion of his time as Labour leader. He is attempting to put Labour's position on the Israel-Hamas conflict to a vote in a bid to maintain party unity. The party has tabled a Commons amendment reflecting concerns over the civilian death toll in the Middle East and urging longer pauses in the fighting to deliver aid. But it echoes the Labour leader's position and stops short of urging an immediate ceasefire in the conflict. Dozens of Labour MPs have defied their leader to call for a ceasefire, and 19 members of the front bench have also publicly diverged from their party's official position. Let's speak now to Barry Gardiner, Labour MP for President. Mr. Gardiner, good morning.
Good morning.
Where do you think the Labour Party should be on this issue and why?
Look, Martin Griffiths, the UN Under-Secretary, spoke very eloquently earlier on your programme about why a ceasefire was necessary for humanitarian relief. I think there are wider considerations in terms of the politics. But let me address head-on what Sir Keir Starmer is saying, because he says that a ceasefire simply freezes the position as it is. In fact, that's exactly what the humanitarian pause does. A ceasefire enables real pressure and real negotiations then to go on, perhaps about the exchange of hostages for prisoners held in Israel. So we need to get to that point and understand that we have to move ultimately to a resolution of the crisis, and that only comes about through talking. The position that the party has adopted, actually this new proposal that has been put forward, the amendment that's been put forward, talks about an enduring cessation of conflict as soon as possible. Now, that's as close as one can possibly get to saying ceasefire without actually saying it. So we have to unpack quite why there is a refusal to say ceasefire, and it's this. Because it's to say that the military operation can resume after whatever pause takes place. Now, I believe that simply, it doesn't eradicate Hamas. What it does is it creates the next generation of Hamas. And it risks widening the conflict in the region, and that we should all be really wary of.
Of course, but from an Israeli point of view, Mr. Gardner, they would say, why on earth should we talk to people who come into our country, set up and designed to kill Jews and slaughter our children?
Look, Hamas is a terrorist organization. What they did was absolutely inexcusable. And Israel is right to say that they have to go in, they have to target what is going on there, and it's absolutely inevitable that they have commenced that military operation. And nobody blames them for what's done. But it has to be done in line with international law. And that's the concern here. Because you Martin Griffiths very eloquently stated that there is no exception when you're talking about hospitals or schools. These are protected areas in international law, and it has to be a proportionate response. Now, 11,000 civilian deaths. What we have seen, it's very hard to describe as a proportionate response. Horrendous though the attack on October 7th was, and every sympathy that one has for the Israeli people from what's happened. But if we want a real resolution to this, it doesn't come about by increased violence. It comes about ultimately by talking, and a ceasefire creates the space in which that dialogue can happen, and hopefully we can move the situation forward.
Okay, let me put those points directly. Thank you, Mr. Garden. Let me put those points directly to Pat McFadden, the Labour MP. Mr. McFadden, good morning.
Good morning.
You heard what Barry Gardiner had to say. How do you respond?
The problem with simply saying ceasefire now is it leaves the Hamas capability and intent in place. And we heard from the Hamas spokesperson, Mr. Ghazi Hamad, a week or so ago, saying that what happened on October the 7th, the greatest slaughter of Israeli civilians since the end of the war, was an intent that Hamas had to repeat a second, a third, and a fourth time. Look, I understand why people want this to stop. I want this to stop. Everybody wants the violence in Gaza to stop and the humanitarian crisis there to end. But I think we have to raise our sights above simply calling for a ceasefire. And the pattern in the past 10 years has been rockets are fired, there are outbreaks of hostilities, and then it repeats itself in a year or two's time. International opinion can now see that process of repeated conflict and containment has failed. And we need to come out of this with something bigger and more ambitious than just saying a ceasefire now, which would leave Hamas's intent and capability in place.
It's clear that there are many issues on which you and all Labour MPs agree, of course. Just on the specific point about why it's stopping short of a ceasefire, Mr. Gardner made the point that as things stand, in his view, Israel's response is not proportionate. What do you say to that point specifically?
I think anyone looking at what's going on in Gaza right now can see the appalling scenes that we're seeing every day.
Is it proportionate? Sorry, obviously it's important. We're seeing babies slaughtered and premature babies moved to other hospitals. Is it proportionate? That's a central
I don't
question.
want to see any civilians killed in this, in either Israel or in Gaza. So where we've got to get to.
No, that's your question to yourself. Forgive me, I'm really sorry. But this is the key, this is the crux of the disagreement within the Labour Party. Right, you both. The position of people who disagree with you, who are calling for a ceasefire, is they say at the moment, it's not our view, it's not BBC argument within the Labour family, that Israel's response is not proportionate. They're clear, it's not proportionate. What do you think?
I agree with the Labour proposition the critical three elements of this.
Why can't you answer that question?
Because
Why can't you answer that question?
because the position set out tonight is a position which deals with the humanitarian crisis, and we've got lots of position about that, causes of illness, to get food in, to get medicine, to get help to the people in Gaza.
It's a classic intellectual gambit on this programme to try and change something to something else, which I totally understand, and I've read the letter and read it closely, and there's a lot of coverage to it. I just really want to try and get to the heart of the disagreement within Labour, and it's striking that your opponents within the Labour family say, on that question, they're clear, and you're not clear. You know, Labour amendment is long, you read it out, have it in the news, but you're not clear on whether you think Israel's response is proportionate.
What I'm clear about is that for this situation to get to a better long-term outcome than the pattern of the past 10 years is that we need to end this virus in a way that doesn't leave Hamas's capability and intent in place, and gives the prospect of a secure Israel in the future, free of a repeat of what happened on October the 7th, and also a better future for the Palestinian people
who were living in appalling circumstances before October the 7th and need a much better future now. And that's going to take real leadership in the future from the Israeli side, from the Palestinian side, and from the international community. And if we can put in
哥哥爸爸開始係嬲嘅，其實
continuous
你日日都咁遲出去，
violence in the country is
你知唔知爸爸要好遲先翻到屋企開始做嘢？
Thank you very much indeed for coming in, and that is an argument that will play out perhaps in the House of Commons.
你聽日再係咁咧，爸爸唔要等你自己搭巴士翻去嘅。你自己6點鐘起身搭巴士翻去學校。
The couple first met in 1961 filming a BBC play, which they say was an absolute stinker. But one good thing to come out of it was their love story, which Tim has shared in a new book. He also writes about what
the significance of relationships and the impact of the surroundings and experiences a child is exposed to during these formative years.
Well, Professor Jack P. Shonkoff is an American pediatrician and now director of the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard University, and one of the foremost experts anywhere in the world on the importance of that. Professor Shonkoff, welcome.
Thank you, Steve.
Good to see you. This is an area that has been bubbling away for decades in terms of interest to people like you. But in the last decade or so, in the last 10 years, we've made very significant strides in understanding the importance of that early years.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And the largest advances have made in the basic biology of early childhood development. There's a lot of focus on molecular learning.
And what have we learned? What are the key things that we've learned?
Well, what's most interesting about this is that this very sophisticated science is coinciding with a lot of common sense. So we've learned how much early experiences literally create a very strong and unique foundation, actually beginning before birth, but certainly the first few years after that. So everything that comes after is all the learning over the baby, the physical and mental health. And the brain is literally shaped, the architecture of the brain is shaped by the experiences of the environment in which kids develop.
For parents listening to this, I was thinking of a lot of parents listening to this who are got 4 young kids like me who are very concerned to make sure they're doing the right thing. Parents need to know about how to optimise those early years. Mindful though we should be that parents are under a huge amount of pressure already, and we don't want to add to that. But what can parents do to make the most of those early years?
I'm glad you said that, because the first thing I'd like to say is that we have a huge amount of science about how the brain develops, but raising children is an art, a bumbling art. It's not a science, right? So what the science does is kind of helps us understand why early experiences are important. And the active ingredient of those early experiences are the relationships that parents have from the beginning with their children. Something we refer to as serve and return interactions. So you think about it, just at the very beginning, you have a baby, he's looking at you, the baby is gurgling, maybe starts to smile. You can't help but smile back. You can't help but kind of coo back. And that's built into our biology, because we're also helpless and unfair. So the most important thing for parents is to understand getting to know their baby from the beginning. It's different. Babies are different. Some are more sensitive to what's going on around. Some are just kind of go with the flow. Some get into sleeping patterns easily. Some cry all the time. All in the normal range.
Yeah.
Right. But all of the way in which we engage with babies and interact with them, and the response that they create a nurturing environment, creates the kind of experiences that the brain is expecting, and it helps the brain build very strong self-assurance.
This has been an area of very active political conversation in this country. About 13 years ago, we had a coalition government, and one of their big focuses was interventions in the early years. It's also something a lot of philanthropists like Jeff Bezos have talked about, because they say that $1 spent when a kid is 2 or 3 gets a much better return than necessarily a I know academics venerating ones such as yourself are wary of advocating policies, but if you did want people in government to hear this, then what would you say about this?
So I think the most important message for governments is the importance of basically creating an environment in a society of other communities that provides supports for those to be able to do this. So we focus a lot on what the children need, which children provide with their own experiences, all of which is nurturing, very important. But at the end of the day, it's the adults who create the needs, basically control and influence the environment in which the baby happens. And so not everyone is something. Some parents will face a lot of pressure to find out. So I think the most pieced together information from witnesses on the ground about the Israeli army raid on the largest hospital in the Gaza Strip, which began at around midnight on time. Israel says that Al-Shifa acts as a command centre for Hamas, which carried out the attacks on Israel, which killed at least 1,200 people, and there are still more than 230 hostages held by Hamas. Now, more than 100 soldiers appear to be systematically searching the hospital, interrogating patients and medical staff, and anyone else seeking shelter. We haven't managed to raise someone on the ground there, but we have managed to speak to Omari's brother. It's there, Omar's brother, Ahmed Al-Gharati. He's a plastic surgeon from London to Gaza to help people. He's now at the Al-Shifa hospital.
The Israeli army is inside the hospital. The Israeli army has organized shooting the hospital, bombing the hospital. My brother said all patients had to be detained. He said some of his patients who have done operation in their injured legs and hands, and the operation has been failed now, and the patients will have lifetime disability. My brother is saying now that the Israeli army is warning everyone in the hospital that they will be they are not at a safe place, and all they need to be careful.
Is your brother safe, does he think?
I don't know. We spoke with him an hour ago. He was okay, but there is no guarantee that he will be safe. We have spoken with the British and Irish embassy that is an Irish citizen with British children. Both embassies and churches they said we can do nothing, and he said very worried that my brother is under the Israeli attack, and countries are not helping him.
Did your brother consider leaving the hospital after the Israelis said that it was safe for them to leave the hospital?
Yes, so my brother said since Friday, no one was allowed to leave the hospital. Anyone was trying to leave were shot by the Israeli snipers around the hospital. So the Israeli army was saying it's safe for them to leave, but it was not the case. So my brother said he will not leave without his patients. So he said he will leave with his patients. He will not leave them alone, as this is why he's staying in the hospital. And he left London to help the Gazan people who are less fortunate, and they don't have this kind of service, like when we talk about the reconstruction and plastic.
Omar, thank you very much indeed for joining us. So that is one of the few accounts that we've yet got from Al-Shifa coming from Omar, from his brother. Of course, not yet able to verify the report, but through the day on the BBC, we will learn more about what can be said about the consequences of that attack.
And just in terms of the bigger picture of this conflict and what happens after the war, that was the subject of the Today Debate with the Shah last night. Jeremy Bowen featured in that debate. Just search for the Today Debate on BBC Sound and you get a really fascinating discussion there.
4 minutes to 9. Did you vote for the Puteki Teki?
You don't know what it is.
It is the bird of the century, at least it is in New Zealand. The triumph, though, became thanks to more than 350,000 votes cast in almost 200 countries, including here, thanks to a campaign by the US talk show host, John Oliver.
I just want the Puteki Teki to win. I want it to win in the biggest landslide in the history of this magnificent competition. I want it to do to other bird of the century candidates what the Puteki Teki does to fish in New Zealand's lakes. That is, eat them alive and then throw them back up in a ball of feathers. Because after all, this is what democracy is all about. America interfering in foreign elections. No matter where you are on earth, make sure you vote for this adorably weird bird freaking together. Let's make bird history!
Making bird history. I wonder if they were in on the joke in New Zealand. Let's talk to Nicola Toki, who's Chief Executive of Forest and Bird, which is New Zealand's leading independent conservation organisation. Morning to you, London time at least. You're smiling, I see.
I am. It still makes me laugh, and we are still pleasantly surprised about the crazy, but in a good way, campaign that John father and last week's night, man.
Now, what attracted him to the Futeki Teki? It's not a natural candidate to win, is it?
Oh, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, is it not? So they got in touch with us earlier this year. Forest and Bird for the last 18 years has run a Bird of the Year competition. It generally invites some controversy. It often even makes international headlines, but only a ripple compared to the tidal wave that we have seen.
But the controversy is partly because of what it looks like, isn't it? It's been described as a weird puking creature with a colourful mullet.
Yes, and we embrace the mullet in New Zealand. So I think maybe people.
Aviation history.
跌咗跌墜位。
That fateful day, Diana lost her father, but she was not a little girl watching television. That was Diana's older sister, Cassie. Diana was born 5 weeks after the plane crash on September the 16th, 1985.
1985年。
After her father's death, Diana and her sister were brought to England by their
Diana
mother.
Spencer.
I have very limited knowledge of who he was. I just have kind of handful of memories. Of course, we are linked because he's my father, but then I also have this sort of huge area where he feels like a stranger.
While Diana didn't have much to go off, her own quirks and behaviours would evoke memories in others.
My mom, as a child, she always said to me, "Oh my gosh, you look like your father." She called me green face. Great. Now, I would fall asleep and say, "What do you think about your father?" Give me the shivers. Like your father.
And there was another connection between Diana and her father that family and friends pointed out. Their shared love of music.
He wanted to be a pianist, but he couldn't because he was a banker and he loved music like I did. My mom's a ballerina, so music is kind of just in my DNA. I was very insistent and very passionate about that.
So passionate, in fact, that Diana got a record deal at just 14.
I was just over the moon. I was so happy. It was everything I ever dreamed of. It was a girl. That was my feeling.
But while the music was involved in connection to her father, it wasn't about trying to be something her father wanted her to be. The violin was a way for Diana to express her own emotions. But the media didn't want to tell that story. They were captivated by the sad tale of child prodigy who lost her father playing passion before she was born.
Almost every single interview, without fail, they were saying to me, "Did you write such sad music?" No, let's stop right there. That's not why I'm playing the violin. I am not playing it because apparently it's supposed to be I'm playing the violin because that's what my heart told me that I wanted to do. Music, I think, kind of accidentally from a young age was and that is why I'm playing.
攞三俾我開門。唔記得攞衫俾我開門。
聽唔到。
唔記得攞衫俾哥哥換啊！佢陣間放學，跟住再去跳舞啊嘛。而家攞衫俾佢換。
That was my dagger in my heart because it was just so incredibly, it just felt very
Diana didn't necessarily show that back. It did feel like it gave her more memories of that person who wanted to be. Dr. Emma Spanberg is a clinical psychologist. She's also known as the Mama
very much of our identity formation comes through our identification with our parents, our separation from our parents, how are we similar or different, how much other people identify us with them as well.
This process becomes more complicated if we've never met one of our parents.
We will develop our own sense of who they are anyway. And one way that we might do that is, for example, thinking about how they look and whether we look like them. What does that mean about whether we are like them in terms of our personality, in terms of our likes and dislikes? It's a very natural question for a child to ask. Where did this come from in me? And there will be grief too in those kind of questions. You know, is this something that I've inherited from a parent that I can't ask? That in itself can bring a new or a different layer of grief, or a wish, a longing to know. What we're talking about is building stories, and those stories become memories that will become part of our makeup and part of the stories that we tell about ourselves too.
And this memory making can be used to draw comfort and guidance to feed our sense of identity and to help with the loss. And this is exactly what Diana did.
I was so longing to know this person, to see this man, and to see, you know, how tall he was, or how much of a room he would take up. You know, what did he look like? What did he sound like? What was his laugh like? Did he have any strange mannerisms? Did he make strange noises? Or, you know, I had so many questions, and I'm trying to work out that whole life of somebody from like a small snippet.
Diana is not alone. In the same Japan Airlines crash that took her father's life, there were 7 families where a child was born after a parent had died in that crash. These kinds of births are given a term that may sound a little clinical, posthumous birth, but it simply means that a child is born after a parent has died. And it's not so uncommon. Posthumous childbirth is well documented throughout history, where fathers died wars or mothers in labour. Today, posthumous birth can also be an intentional decision. Reproductive technologies mean that children can be conceived long after one parent has passed away. For Ashley Reese, that's the plan with her beloved husband, Rob.
Personally, I wish to keep someone alive when they're not physically there.
The writer from the city met the small-town law student on the dating site OkCupid in 2014.
Hey, I saw Deer Hunter a few months ago. They're great. He responded by sharing this song, and figured I'd like it, and I did.
Along with music, they also discovered a shared love for hiking. Well, some of them.
Every hike, no matter what, by the last like 4 I would just break down. Get into it. Always be this like calm, motivating factor for me. It's just like, we're so close. We can do it.
Ashley and Rob have been together for 5 years when everything changed. On July the 2nd, 2019, Rob was diagnosed with a rare cancer in his abdomen.
One of the things they talk about before you start chemo is neuroinflammation in general. You even think you might want children, you should freeze your sperm. It was just a question. Like, yeah, okay, I will do that.
Despite early remission, Rob's cancer returned a few years later in the spring of 2022.
We planned our wedding in a week, and whenever we found out Rob's going to die.
On October the 16th, after a big community effort, Rob and Ashley married in their Brooklyn backyard, surrounded by friends, family, and the music they first bonded over.
I'm wearing my white dress with my red roses on it, and Rob was in his favorite suit. We were just looking at each other, smiling.
After they were married, Ashley went for a coffee with a friend who had lost her mother to cancer when she was 2. And a friend told her that she went 40 years wishing for a sign or anything at all from her mother. After hearing her friend's experience, Ashley came home with a request for Rob.
I asked Rob to write a letter to our future kids. whatever he wanted to say, to feel like he's still involved in the process, beyond just like offering, you know, his firm.
And Rob wrote, Ashley caught glimpses of the message in the letter.
He loved her very much, and he's sad that he won't be able to meet them, but he, typical Rob fashion, he tries to go practical and also offer some like advice, some wisdom, travel, don't procrastinate.
Rob died on December the 8th, 2022.
I always have this idea of like us on a hike or something.
呢個車喺度等我。
好啊好啊。
佢自己翻屋企喎。佢如果等家長嘅話，就唔會俾佢走出嚟。
Psychologists like Dr. Emma Sandberg talk about physically putting it into a memory box.
佢好似哥哥咁嘅年紀咯，就開始可以俾佢自己翻屋企。即係如果個家長同意嘅話，
即係如果住得近，
家長同意。
And the memory box too comes back to the importance of storytelling.
Storytelling is often our most powerful tool when we're bereaved. We tell stories about that person. And in some cultures there are rituals around that. That is part of the grieving process. We share memories and we share experiences. For a child who hasn't met that person, actually the importance of hearing those stories, it cannot be underestimated, so that they get the opportunity to form their own picture of what this person was and how they
如果要唔要我哋喺嗰度買咗，跟住喺架車度食啊？跟住公公可以過去。
otherwise we end up carrying these kind of unresolved traumas, unresolved grief through into generations.
不如換電話搞
the memory box is some other way connected.
I would definitely describe my relationship with
細 B B 未瞓㗎嘛係咪？
spiritual.
And in the month of August especially, Diana feels that spiritual connection come to the fore. Across Japan, August is a festival of the God.
No 咯 ，no is a no。
Families paying their respects
That's
to
no
their
one.
ancestors.
Ancestral spirits return to the
Because I
family
said
only at this time of year.
因為我話 no 就係
Also,
OK。
when Diana's father took the Japan
Because I'm the rule，OK。
his usual bullet train, the Santa, was fully booked as people were travelling home to honour their dead loved ones.
It's really powerful timing that so many people died at a time when the ancestral spirits are supposed to be returning home.
During a bomb in August 1995, 10 years after the plane crash, an annual memorial service was started for the victims. Bereaved family members climbed the trail to the crash site on the Osaka mountain ridge beneath Japan. And when Diana was 13, she and her mother and older sister travelled to Japan to take part.
I was really excited, but also felt this huge heaviness of what we were about to actually do. So I did the thing that I feel safest with, which was to take my violin with me. When you physically are at the place of where this huge
喂，你入去食啊？
you
我喺
suddenly
度等
feel
你
the。gravity of it in a very different way because you're physically witnessing the amount of life
睇住細 B B。
I was talking my music on the
我
mountain.
哋喺攞買喺架車度食。
唔係咧，入邊食
Worried
啊！
about how
我睇住，我睇你細佬。
Okay, you might want to roll down the windows so you can
Diana
get
hurries
air.
to seek refuge in a little wooden hut. And in the hut, she finds thousands of origami cranes, pictures,
你
and
哋你哋去食啊！
observations
我睇住細佬。
were lost.
Already opened.
She looks
Already
out
opened
喂
that.
唔好咁大啊！傻咗啊！
spots a haunting gap in the tree line. It's where the plane cut through
凍死人
as
啊！
it descended.
If we let them get away with that, I think they'd never stop writing. But look, yeah, I mean, everywhere is different. Everywhere has its own kind of set word tone and the kind
頭先啊，
of
唔喐佢唔中意佢樣。
But no, I mean, it
得啦嘛，
emerges pretty much.
仲有
誒熄咗佢啦。
When you say yay or nay, and I think the only judgment I've ever taken on these kind of things is it good? That is what I tend to take.
I think Suella Braverman Chapman's article certainly passed that test. It generated an awful lot of news. But I wonder if you have any concerns about the Times simply providing a platform for someone making whatever political point they want to make.
I think it's up to the voters to decide on what our politicians say. And look, I mean, I want to be very clear, I'm not speaking, so that's way above my pay grade. But what I do think in a pay grade that is one of the most senior cabinet members in Britain.
佢話你問嗰啲問題，我俾唔夠人工你答，好正。冇啊，停啊！爸爸要知道點行啊 ？No, not really. Not usually. It changes all the time.
Now let's look at it from the perspective of political communications with Joe Tanner, Senior Director at Communications
如果放工時候啊，啲交通唔一定一樣。OK， 你睇小鎮唔得。睇細佬啊！
In his campaign for Mayor of London, you placed articles in the press for ministers in the past. Tell us about the process from your side of the equation.
Well, I mean, Jerry's right in terms of what she said. There are slightly different circumstances where actually a publication can ask, can approach a minister or a politician to write something. So it can be done in reverse rather than it coming directly from a political minister. And there is often a question as an advisor, if that request were to come that way, what is it you're looking for? Are you looking for a particular position to be taken? Are you looking for anything particular to be said? Now, it's rare that a sort of publication would steer you, but in the event of a publication that has, for example, a big campaign going, they might ask you, we're looking for someone that can cover this area off or that area off. So think of big campaigns like the Sun on their fuel tax or some of the health campaigns that the Daily Mail have run in the past. You might have that kind of conversation about the content, but on this occasion it appears that, I don't know if it was, it appears certainly from what's been said, that the approach was made from the Home Secretary's team. I'm not aware of this other round. But then obviously the process goes on behind the scenes by clearance.
Well, one clearance, according to the FT, Rishi Sunak's spokesperson said the article was not cleared by Number 10. If that was the case, would that surprise you? In your experience, would it be normal that an article of this nature by a senior cabinet minister would be seen by a lot of people, including Number 10?
如果你最近冇聽 News One 係咪？你唔知發生咩事喎而家？同我講，唔係我同哥哥。你知唔知講緊咩？所以咧 ，brave 哥哥。呢個 Home Secretary 俾人炒咗嘛？哥哥 ，Cabinet reshuffle。Yeah. Still need to know. 我同佢講話，英國嗰啲內閣轉晒咁。
You're referring to the plans that the government or particular ministries will have for the media, is that right?
Yeah, so there's a Number 10 central grid, and then there's those plans kind of they incorporate the different departments the government has. So you remember the government's attempts to regain control of the news agenda with their various weeks that ended up not being overly successful, particularly over the summer. So that is when there'll be a sort of government try to get several ministers or sort of announcements made by those ministers in a particular week or a certain day if they want to sort of saturate the media with what they're doing.
Joe, thank you very much. So you've helped us see this from a political comms perspective. Let's bring in the journalist Michael Crick, who worked for Newsnight, BBC, Channel 4 News, and for many others. Hello, Michael. Welcome to the media show. Are you surprised that a placement of an article in a newspaper, a manoeuvre that politicians have done for many decades, is still able to have this kind of impact?
No, it doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, in the old days, politicians, take Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech back in '68, which was one of the most notorious speeches of all time. He chose to make a speech. That's what Tony Benn would do when he was being rebellious against the Wilson and Callaghan government in the 70s. Politicians tend not to make big platform speeches these days. And the Times was an obvious choice, really. I mean, the Times is, without doubt, in my view anyway, the the best political newspaper around by a long way, an obvious platform. You don't, and the Times is bound to give it the front page splash, the headline, and likely to pick it up on Times Radio and other associated outlets within the group, and other papers don't always have those kind of links, so it's an obvious place to go. I suppose the other option would be to come here to the BBC or another broadcaster, but there aren't that many long-form interviews these days in broadcasting, and the danger is that they're supposed to get challenged by a tough interviewer. So writing an article, unquestioned by the Times, is perhaps the more attractive way, or indeed another newspaper, the more attractive way of doing it.
So you're more in control if you do that rather than don't take a broadcast interview. And Joe, when you're looking across the different newspapers that Suella Braverman could have chosen, what would be the criteria that she would be applying? What does one paper offer versus another?
Well, I mean, it's changed a lot since I was advising some of the politicians you mentioned earlier. We've obviously got the connection now between publications with particular radio stations. So as Michael said, you've got that connection with Times and Times Radio. You might look at particular journalists that are at those publications who are particularly strong on social media and might amplify your words. You would also look at the timing. So, for example, when you look at the release of stories, some publications, some newspapers are quicker at getting those stories up and live. So the sort of days of the midnight embargo when you would have a story published in a newspaper for the next day, you wouldn't see anything of it until that following morning. As social media and digital platforms have developed, we actually get stories that break the night before. That means you actually make the news the night before the day that you're thinking you're going to be.
Yes, and this article went live, I think, on the Times website at 10 p.m. on Wednesday night. Just in case those of you listening are wondering what the various papers have had to say about the current state of politics, particularly between Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak, the Mail's editorial says, "Time to end Tories' ruinous clown show." The Sun's leader says, "Unite or die, ceaseless civil war is election suicide." And the Telegraph said, Tory MPs are acutely aware that another change of leader would look farcical.
It's our problem,
Now,
because
Michael,
it's
we'd
about
expect
this
these debates
country.
to be playing out through the country's best-selling newspapers. But what was striking on Monday and on Tuesday as the story unfolded was we were seeing podcasts. George Osborne on his podcast reacting, Alistair Campbell on his podcast reacting. Of course, there's GB News, which hosts a number of people either who are Tory MPs or have connections with the Tories, so it's playing host to some of the debates within the Tory party. So it's interesting the different types of media that we're seeing being used to share reaction.
Yeah, there's a wealth of media. I mean, in some ways, the media is stronger than it's ever been. The wealth output, the outlets that you can have, the reaction, the counter-reaction, Twitter, and so on. But I mean, that doesn't mean the flies, doesn't mean that it's always plural. I mean, it was a very interesting thing yesterday when Suella Braverman wrote her leaving letter. And in the middle of that, there was this story about how she'd agreed a document with the Prime Minister, and that barely got covered anywhere. And I couldn't understand it. So there's sometimes a unity of approach by the media, even though there are so many outlets nowadays.
I'd expected it more as well. I had plenty of journalists looking at it. I'm sure there are plenty of journalists, including Jerry Swan. Jerry, you would like to get your hands on that document, I'm sure, wouldn't you?
Oh, I'd love to get my hands on that document. That would be an absolute scoop, and I imagine that would make the front page of the Times as well.
I'm sure it would. Now, we started this programme, in fact, throughout it, we've been looking at the different journalistic processes that our guests have had. Jerry, let's finish with you. When the article arrives and you see what Suella Braverman is going to say, do you then speak to the news desk, and does the Times line up a range of material, a range of coverage to go with the article from the then Home Secretary?
Well, as ever, it depends, and I know that's a bit of a sit on the first answer, but, I wasn't involved in this particular one, so I can't tell you exactly how it went with this one, but in general, yeah, I mean, you call the news desk and say, this is what we've got, this is what we think we should do, you tend to run it as it links about a news story, and then take over if it's good, if it's not,
Events certainly did unfold after it was published on Wednesday night. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thanks in fact to all 5 of our guests: CNN's international diplomatic editor Nick Robertson, Tim Marshall, former Foreign Affairs and diplomatic editor for Sky News, Joe Tanner, senior director at the communications consultancy APCO Worldwide, Michael Crick with me here in the studio, journalist of course, and Jerry Scott, senior political correspondent at the Times. Many thanks to all of them. Many thanks to all of you for listening. We'll talk to you soon.
The Media Show is presented by Ross Atkins. The producer was Simon Richardson.
You got them all we're speaking to.
Drama on BBC Radio 4.
Our moons have become solar systems, galaxies of fungus.
What if you saw your family in danger and no one would believe you?
The mold isn't real, Cass. It's not there, okay? It never has been.
A new psychological horror series. Spores.
It had started to transform.
Next Monday to Friday at 2:15 on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds. This is BBC Radio 4. It's 5 o'clock. Time for PM with Evan Davis.
Decisions, a day of them in Westminster. This morning, the Supreme Court decision against the plan to send those arriving by small boats to Rwanda. The government has made a decision not to take no for an answer. It'll have another go at Rwanda, but at a live press conference, Rishi Sunak has just said he'll pass emergency legislation to deem Rwanda a safe country and prevent the merry-go-round of legal challenges getting in the way of his plan.
I do not agree with this decision, but I respect it and accept it. The rule of law is fundamental to our democracy. We have prepared for all outcomes of this case, and so we have been working on a new international treaty with Rwanda. This will provide a guarantee in law that those who are relocated from the UK to Rwanda will be protected against removal from Rwanda, and it will make clear that we will bring back anyone if ordered to do so by court. We will finalise the treaty in light of today's judgment and ratify it without delay.
Well, there was a lot in the statement with the bringing of this portion of that treaty on Rwanda and proposed changes to the law, the emergency legislation, and on his former Home Secretary's withering attack on it. But there are also decisions to be made about Gaza. MPs are debating whether to support a ceasefire.
When we fail to provide peaceful justice and in the eyes of the world, it is one rule for the allies of the US and another for the rest. These are not my words, but the words uttered by the former Labour Foreign Secretary, the late Robin Cook, in this very chamber that sadly rings true 20 years on.
Naz Shah, a Labour frontbencher. Now MPs will be voting at 7. Labour MPs have been told to abstain on the ceasefire motion. It seems that many are ready to disobey that instruction. It's a busy day out there of decisions and divisions in both the main parties. Rwanda, Suella, Labour. Lots to report. But we'll start with the BBC News, read today by Jim.
In the past few minutes, Rishi Sunak has said he will introduce emergency legislation to rescue and send some asylum seekers to Rwanda after the policy was ruled unlawful by the UK's highest court. Mr Sunak said he would work on the concerns of the Supreme Court and insisted that the government was determined to do all it could to stop the boats. This morning, the Supreme Court backed a previous ruling that there was a risk genuine asylum seekers deported to Rwanda could be sent back to the country they had fled from. Our home and legal correspondent from the Kashon is listening to this decision.
不过你走走3分钟哦。
Justices left the flagship project Arthurs, who agreed before the president said that when the High Court ruled last December that migrants could be sent to Rwanda, there had been no proper consideration of the United Nations Refugee Agency's detailed criticism. That evidence, the Supreme Court ruled, showed that Rwanda did not pass a simple test of being a safe country. Any genuine refugee transported there was at risk of being sent back to where they had fled. Crucially,
Just now, by coincidence timing, this is one of those days where we have a confluence of important political stories. The parliamentary vote in a couple of hours on a Gaza ceasefire, and of course the most serious crisis on Keir Starmer's front bench since he became leader. We have the aftermath, of course, of Suella Braverman's departure from government and her extraordinary attack on Rishi Sunak yesterday. And of course, the Supreme Court decision to strike down a central piece of the government's policy on stopping the vote. Three political events, two political parties managing the fallout. On the Supreme Court, their decision was not body. The government accepts it. It's looking to upgrade the Rwanda scheme to bring it into compliance. But in the last 20 minutes, an extraordinary event, because notwithstanding the fact that statements had been made in the Commons earlier by the new Home Secretary, James Cleverly, the Prime Minister has just announced a huge change in policy, a law that simply overrides the verdicts of the judges that would deem Rwanda a safe place to send people, notwithstanding the fact the judges were doubtful of that this morning. Well, Rishi Sunak did all of that by going into a rather swish Downing Street briefing room 20 minutes ago for that press conference, and let's hear a big chunk of what he's been saying.
Today, the Supreme Court has judged that the Rwanda policy requires a set of changes in order to be lawful. I do not agree with this decision, but I respect it and accept it. I do not agree with this decision, but I respect it and accept it. The rule of law is fundamental to our democracy. We have prepared for all outcomes of this case. And so we have been working on a new international treaty with Rwanda. This will provide a guarantee in law that those who are relocated from the UK to Rwanda will be protected against removal from Rwanda. And it will make clear that we will bring back anyone if ordered to do so by a court. We will finalise the treaty in light of today's judgment and ratify it without delay. But we need to end the merry-go-round. I said I was going to fundamentally change our country, and I meant it. So I'm also announcing today that we will take the extraordinary step of introducing emergency legislation. This will enable Parliament to confirm that with our new treaty, Rwanda is safe. It will ensure that people cannot further delay flights by bringing systemic challenges in our domestic court and stop our policy being repeatedly blocked. But of course, we must be honest about the fact that even once Parliament has changed the law here at home, we could still face challenges from the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. I told Parliament earlier today that I'm prepared to change our laws and revisit those international relationships to remove the obstacles in our way. So let me tell everybody now, I will not allow a foreign court to block these flights. If the Strasbourg court chooses to intervene against the express wishes of Parliament, I am prepared to do what is necessary to get flights off. I will not take the easy way out, because I fundamentally do not believe that anyone thinks the founding aim of the European Convention on Human Rights was to stop a sovereign parliament removing illegal migrants to a country deemed to be safe in parliamentary statute and binding international law. And I do not believe that we are alone in that interpretation. Across Europe, other governments are following our lead. Italy, Germany, Austria are all exploring models like ours. Indeed, the UNHCR operates its own refugee scheme in Rwanda. And unlike the UK, they don't have a treaty for any of this. We are a reasonable government, and this is a reasonable country. But the British people's patience can only be stretched so thin, and they expect the vote to be stopped. That is why I made it one of my 5 priorities. And whatever our critics might say, we are making progress. Because the Rwanda scheme is only one part of our strategy. Last December, the number entering the UK illegally in small boats had more than quadrupled in just 2 years. Since then, this year, they are down by a third, even as the numbers entering the rest of Europe have soared, with illegal crossings of the Mediterranean up by 80%. We're ending the farce of taxpayers footing the bill to put illegal migrants in hotels, with 50 closures announced already, returning them to local communities. Illegal working rates are up by almost 70%, and we have made over 5,000 arrests this year. We've concluded returns and cooperation agreements with France, Bulgaria, Turkey, Italy, Georgia, and Albania. We've cut the legacy initial asylum backlog by almost 2/3, and in total, we've returned over 20,000 illegal migrants this year. The facts are clear. This government has done more and delivered more than any government in the last 5 years to tackle illegal migration. But to fully solve this problem, the Rwanda policy is a necessary deterrent. That's why it's important that the Supreme Court has today confirmed that the principle of removing asylum seekers to a third safe country is lawful. Because it means that when we have addressed the Supreme Court's concerns, people will know that if they come here illegally, they will not get to stay, and so they will stop coming altogether. That is how we will stop the boats. In recent years, many people have lost faith in politicians' ability to do the things they said they would do. They fear that politicians are more interested in grandstanding than delivering to the British people. I've been determined to change that, to deliver on the commitments that I made. I committed at the start of this year to halve inflation. Back then, inflation was 10.7%. But new figures released this morning by the Office of National Statistics show that inflation is now 4.6%. I'm not saying the job is done. Many people have struggled and continue to struggle. We must stay the course until inflation returns to target. But it shows that when I said we would halve inflation, I meant it. When I said I would stop the boats, I meant it. Today's judgment has not weakened my resolve, it has only hardened it. And we will deliver that too. Thank you.
So that was Rishi Sunak's opening statement to the press conference. That was literally getting on about half an hour ago. And then goes on to take questions. We may come back and be able to hear some of the questions that he faced. But making that announcement that he is going to take legal steps to, if you like, ensure that Rwanda can go ahead as planned. Listening to that, Newsnight's political editor, Nick Watt, who joins us now. Nick, it was interesting, we didn't get that from the James Cleverly statement this morning in the comments. We had a vaguer sort of assertion that maybe something will be up on the legal front. What do you make of what we just heard?
Well, as you were saying, Evan, a serious announcement, 3 big concrete steps by the Prime Minister that are designed to answer what allowed the Supreme Court to say that this policy is unlawful. So the first one, as we heard from the Prime Minister there, that's the new international treaty with Rwanda. After Prime Minister's questions, Rishi Sunak did a tour of the tea room. He told Tory MPs that he hopes to have this treaty ready to go within the next week. And what does this do? Well, this answers this thing called the non-refoulement, which is the Supreme Court saying they don't believe that there is a guarantee that people who are sent to Rwanda will not then be sent back to their country of origin. We will have a treaty with Rwanda which will have a guarantee, we are told, that that will not happen. The second thing he's doing is this emergency legislation introduced here in the UK that will designate Rwanda a safe country. And that is designed to answer this big question mark about whether Rwanda can be a safe country. And then the third thing is the European Convention on Human Rights, and essentially the Prime Minister is saying, I will make sure that no foreign court, i.e. the European Court of Justice in Strasbourg, can stop these flights. What that sounds like is implementing a clause in the illegal migration bill, which is to severely restrict the so-called Rule 39 injunctions. Those are those injunctions under the ECHR that have allowed domestic courts to stop these flights.
Right, so pretty hefty legal stuff going on there. Just in terms of his positioning, Nick, this is, I think, close to the Suella Braverman way of dealing with all of this, probably, than some other approaches that one might imagine. Where does it leave Rishi Sunak?
Can we just say, up to a point, because the Suella Braverman view, and she's tweeted in the last hour, is she wants to block these international conventions and international laws that are stopping this happening. In other words, take action internationally. What Rishi Sunak is saying, we are going to do this entirely through domestic law. So yes, it is a very strong position from the Prime Minister, but it's not going as far as Suella Braverman would want. Where does this leave the Prime Minister? There is deep unease on the right in the Conservative Party that this plan has been blocked again in the courts. But, I was talking earlier to Danny Kruger, I think you might have interviewed him as well, he has doubts, but he's pleased that the Prime Minister is at least saying he has a plan.
Alright, just while we have you, Nick, this is a very big day for the Conservative Party, but also for Labour. What's your intelligence at the moment as to what is facing Keir Starmer in terms of a rebellion by his MPs on the issue of a ceasefire?
We have a very nervous Labour leadership because there are significant Labour figures, Matt Sharp, for example, the front bench, standing up in the House of Commons this afternoon saying we must have an immediate ceasefire, which is of course not Keir Starmer's position. But it's all going to depend on how this works out. So there is a Labour amendment to the King's Speech which talks about how humanitarian pauses should be longer and talks about working towards a cessation. And then there's an SNP amendment which talks about an immediate ceasefire. There is a scenario where they both go to a vote, and if front benchers vote for the SNP one, then Keir Starmer has a major rebellion on his hands. But there's a scenario that the Labour one's voted on first. The government, Conservatives could abstain on that. That gets through. If that gets through, that knocks out the SNP amendment.
Push us to do better, and this is why, despite all the risks to our personal positions, we must do what is right. Whilst it may be a matter of convention to follow our closest ally, the US, in interest of foreign policy, it is a matter of conscience to step away from our closest ally in the interest of peace. We know that eventually there will be a ceasefire in this current crisis. Every war ends with a cessation of hostilities. The question is not if there will be a ceasefire, but when.
Naz Shah, the Shadow Minister for Crime Reduction. Let's just find out what is happening on Labour benches with Sienna Rogers, senior writer at The House magazine and former editor of Labour List. And Sienna, what is your understanding of A, whether they get a vote, and B, who will be voting which way?
Good evening. Yes, so it does seem, obviously there can always be these last-minute rebels. I mean, the Labour amendment has kind of moved the wording of the party's position closer to what the rebels are more comfortable with, but it is difficult because a number of MPs simply feel they have to vote for something with nothing less than that word ceasefire in it. And I mean, on the one hand, they have kept shadow cabinet members, people like Siobhan and Mahmood, where this kind of issue is quite difficult for them. They've kept them on side, so that's a good thing. But there are, from the front bench, people who are certainly not from the Corbynite left of the party. I mean, there are not many of those kind of MPs on the front bench nowadays anyway, but people like Jess Phillips, people like Sarah Owen, these aren't the Corbynite left sort of MPs, so it will be interesting to see to what extent that kind of Labour MP will rebel tonight.
Sienna, thanks for that. Sienna Rogers. We can speak to one MP from this plan, Rachel Luskin, MP for York Central. Rachel, joining us from Central Lobby there. Well, first just give us a brief summary of the reason why you were so determined to vote for the SNP motion rather than Keir Starmer.
Good evening. I'll be voting for Labour's amendments as well as for the ceasefire. It's absolutely crucial to do everything within our power to stop the killing of innocent civilians, whether in Israel or in Palestine. And of course, we're talking about children losing their lives, babies losing their lives, people who just want to live out their lives. And therefore, we've got a huge responsibility this evening, not to play the politics, but to play on our conscience and to do the right thing in saying that the killing has got to stop, because until the killing stops, the talks will not begin.
Now on the politics, has Keir Starmer made this more painful for his party than it needed to be? Has he mishandled this?
The pain is all in Gaza, the pain isn't here in Westminster, and we can't describe it as pain in the same way.
Political pain. Has he made it more difficult for Labour than it needs to be?
Well, of course Labour should have put down an amendment which called for a ceasefire, because if we don't call for a ceasefire, why should we expect those bombs to stop dropping? And therefore we've got that moral responsibility. And the question I have been asking throughout this process, if you have a humanitarian pause, what is the justification for the recommencement of bombs falling on civilians.
So that's the argument that you might have with Keir Starmer about the actual substance of the issue. In his handling of it, are you dissatisfied? Should he, for example, have said, this is an issue of conscience, I'm not going to tell you how to vote?
Well, it is not only an issue of conscience.
Court and stop our policy being repeatedly blocked.
Tonight, one lawyer involved in the case said the Prime Minister's plan was bizarre because no treaty or laws could counter the evidence of mistreatment. The current plan is in tatters. Its replacement could end up mired in the courts for another year.
Former Home Secretary Suella Braverman, who responded to her sacking by accusing Mr Sunak of a failure of leadership, has urged the government to now legislate or admit defeat on the Rwanda plan. Many of her backers in the Conservative Party said it was clear that the UK needed to withdraw from international agreements. They said we're holding back important policies. Government correspondent Logan Nash.
The Rwanda asylum scheme was at the heart of one of Rishi Sunak's key promises to voters after taking office, stopping people crossing the channel in small boats to get to the UK. A policy that became so central to his government is now on life support, with the Supreme Court judgment setting off a fresh round of infighting within the Tory party. At Prime Minister's questions this afternoon, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer said the scheme had failed and it was time to go back to the drawing board.
He was told over and over again that this would happen, that it wouldn't work, that it was just the latest Tory gimmick. But he bet everything on it, and now he's totally exposed. The central pillar of his government has crumbled beneath him. Does he want to apologise to the country for wasting £140 million of taxpayer cash on wasting his entire time in office?
Rishi Sunak insisted the court had backed the idea of removing asylum seekers to a safe third country and said a new treaty with Rwanda would now be finalised. Ministers hope a revised, legally binding agreement with Kigali will address some of the issues raised by the court and resuscitate the scheme. Suella Braverman, who was Home Secretary just 72 hours ago, said new legislation was needed to block off routes to mounting a legal challenge, including through the European Convention on Human Rights, or else the government must admit defeat. Former Cabinet Minister Simon Clarke agreed.
Delivering the policy of stopping the boats is a confidence issue of the British people in this government. A failure to act decisively now would be unsustainable and unacceptable ahead of next year's general election. We are now at a point where the question of who governs Britain applies.
With Tory MPs arguing about whether abandoning international conventions was the right response to the judgment, Rishi Sunak promised not to allow a foreign court to block flights to Rwanda without elaborating on how he would ensure that, and said he intended the first plane to take off next spring. His backbenchers will be watching for more detail on how he intends to deliver on his pledges.
Our Home Editor Mark Easton has this assessment of the government's prospects of making its Rwanda policy a reality. There was, I'm told, a collective sense of shock at the Home Office when today's Supreme Court decision came through. The justices did not only rule Rwanda was unsafe, they warned that whatever intentions and aspirations the East African state makes now, the question was whether they were achievable in practice. The Prime Minister's chances of getting a new, improved treaty with the Rwandan government that will satisfy the courts in the immediate future look decidedly slim. Flights in the spring, Rishi Sunak hopes. Most immigration lawyers don't think there'll be migrant flights to Rwanda or anywhere else before an election, if ever. The Supreme Court judgment implies that from the Prime Minister down, the UK continued to claim Rwanda was a completely safe country for refugees when there was ample and compelling evidence it was not. Justices said British police had recently warned Rwandan nationals in the UK of credible plans by the Rwandan government to kill them. They referred to extrajudicial killings, deaths in custody, enforced disappearances, torture, the risk that judges and lawyers would not act independently of the government, and, critically, evidence of genuine refugees being sent back to the countries from which they fled after the UK had signed the deal to send asylum seekers there. So how can the government stop the boats now? Without the option of packing migrants off to Rwanda, the Home Office's policy, laid out in its flagship Illegal Migration Act, simply won't work. Rishi Sunak has said there'll be emergency legislation, but it will be mighty hard to achieve any kind of result on small boats
before the country delivers its verdict on the government at an election. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has welcomed a sharp fall in the rate of inflation and says the government is winning its battle with rising prices. The rate for October, as measured by the Consumer Prices Index, was 4.6%, a two-year low, down from 6.7% in September. The government says its pledge to halve inflation by the end of the year has been met early. Here's our chief economics correspondent, Dashi Nite.
It was wholesale energy prices which drove the sharp rise in the cost of living and also enabled the marked fall in inflation last month. That's when the regulator Ofgem cut the cap on domestic bills in response to changes in global commodity markets. Also bearing down on inflation have been the 14 hikes in interest rates delivered by the Bank of England since 2021. By raising borrowing costs and squeezing spending, those increases help curb the rate at which the prices of many non-essential items, from furniture to hotel stays, have gone up. So while the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has claimed the government had met its pledge of halving overall inflation this year, that was mainly down to factors outside the government's influence. And Mr. Hunt admitted there was more to be done.
We took some very difficult decisions to control borrowing and debt, and we have now delivered that pledge a whole month early. There's lots more work to do. We still have to bring inflation down to its target level of 2%, but now we are beginning to win the battle against inflation.
Many households still face prices much higher than a year ago. Food is 10% more expensive. Clothing is 6% dearer. The Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, said the struggle for many continues.
The truth is, during the course of this Parliament, the cost of living crisis has hit hard.
The further strikes is her first priority on taking up the role. Talks with officials of the Doctors' Union, the British Medical Association, are underway and have not required direct ministerial involvement so far. Government sources have said Victoria Atkins wants to meet the main players and develop relationships, even if the talks remain focused on technical negotiations with representatives of consultants and junior doctors. NHS leaders have told ministers that achieving agreement with the two groups is vital ahead of what's already predicted to be a very challenging winter. Questions have been asked about the fact that Ms Atkins' husband has a senior role in the sugar industry. A spokesperson said that as she'd done in previous ministerial roles, the Secretary of State would recuse herself on departmental issues relating to outside interests, all of which have been declared under the ministerial code. It's not clear which issues are affected, but it seems likely this will include anything related to sugar taxes. BBC News has learned that the government is planning to increase by more than 50% the price of guarantees to pay for new offshore wind energy. Under the proposals, providers will receive around £70 per megawatt hour, up from £44. Ministers want to attract new investment in the industry, which has seen sharp rises in the cost of building wind farms and connecting them to the national grid. Our business editor, Simon Jack, reports.
The UK government has a target to quadruple the energy created by offshore wind turbines by 2030, but earlier this year, an auction for new facilities failed to attract a single bid. The price the government set for the electricity they will produce is deemed too low by energy firms to cover the increased cost of building them. The BBC understands that the government will raise the price they guarantee to pay producers by more than 50% to entice firms back to an industry seen vital to hitting the UK's emissions targets. The price of offshore wind will still be about a third lower than that produced by gas fuel power stations and is not vulnerable to the international volatility of fossil fuel prices. The Chancellor is expected to use his autumn statement next week to announce plans to speed up the connection of offshore wind to the national grid by reclassifying these links as critical national infrastructure, while also consulting on ways to compensate affected communities by offering discounts on energy bills, an approach industry sources describe as a combination of stick and carrot.
A barrister who acted for the Post Office in the criminal trial of two sub-postmasters caught up in the Horizon IT scandal has apologised personally for his part in their convictions. Warwick Chatford was giving evidence to the public inquiry into the faulty computer system, which resulted in around 700 people being wrongly prosecuted for accounting mistakes. Our business correspondent, Emma Simpson.
Today Today's evidence focused on the case of Sunak Misra, who was pregnant and jailed in 2010 for false accounting and stealing more than £70,000 from a post office in West Byfleet. Her conviction was quashed in 2021. With Mrs Misra sitting just feet away, Warwick Tatford, who prosecuted her in court, said this.
Mrs Misra, I can see her, and I'm very
你
sorry.
頭先跳舞嗰個點
I
啊？
feel ashamed that I was part of
你
this.
做緊乜嘢？
but
哥
I
哥
want
跳舞
to
啊
try and help
嚇
if I can.
Mr Tatford acknowledged that there had been many failings on his part. Much of the questioning was on the use of the Fujitsu engineer Gareth Jenkins as an expert witness, who was seen as crucial to the jury's decision. The barrister said there were failures in how Mr Jenkins came to be
你教
appointed.
咗
Mr Tatford
阿
said
拉拿啲
he
咩？
should have seen the paperwork and asked more questions. As to the
Beginning.
robustness of
佢
Horizon,
點解 miss 咗
he
兩
said
堂嘅
he
之
felt
前？
he'd been misled, but by whom it was
嗰
difficult
啲
to
啊
say.
In the city, the 100 share index
Her mother's
up
favour.
46 points
Oh no.
at 7,487. On Wall Street a short time ago, the Dow Jones was up 117 points at 34,945. On the currency markets, the pound is trading at $1.24.2. Against the euro, sterling is at €1.
佢仲有冇同拉拿玩嗰啲 Minecraft 嗰啲㗎？ 點解嘅？你唔想同佢玩？
Hundreds of people remain in temporary accommodation after being told to leave
你有冇同佢玩
their
Roblox
homes
咁？
flats in the centre of Bristol. An
No.
emergency incident was declared by Bristol City Council for their safety. Our correspondent Dan Johnson has been talking to some of the residents of Farson House.
400 residents were told to leave immediately last night after a safety inspection revealed a structural weakness, meaning the 65-year tower may not withstand a fire or sudden impact.
In fact, all the way around.
In his 10-year plan, Wilfred Stewart was collecting belongings and pointing out some issues.
And he's supposed to be support. And if they keep cracking, something is right.
Noor Sharif also returned today for more information.
Moving here like just sentence. I don't think it's safe to come back here.
Ever.
No, I don't think so. Because if they evacuate us, less than 24 hours, there's something serious there.
Bristol City Council says this structural issue is a specific problem unique to this building because it wasn't originally constructed as intended. It is not the same aerated concrete which has affected many schools and hospitals, but the design, concrete panels fitted together known as the large panel system, has caused problems elsewhere. It's not clear when or if these residents can return to their homes.
Official figures show the cost of renting privately in the UK increased by 6.1% in the 12 months to October, the biggest annual percentage rise since comparable records began in 2016. Cricket and India have cruised into the final of the World Cup, beating New Zealand by 70 runs in Mumbai. Apparently, the stadium witnessed a match-winning performance by bowler Mohammad Shami and a record-breaking century from Virat Kohli. His 50th century innings surpasses Sachin Tendulkar for the most one-day international hundreds ever. The headlines again. Rishi Sunak has said he will press ahead with the plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda, even after it was ruled unlawful by the UK Supreme Court. The Prime Minister promised emergency laws to prevent further legal challenges, as it wanted the first flight to take off next spring. Labour said the policy is in ruins. With his thoughts, here's our political editor, Chris Mason.
John has taken power. This morning across Parliament Square, the Commons and the Lords, the Supreme Court spotlight, a language court can occasionally be fairly psychical mumbo-jumbo. Instead, all reads in a passive tone couldn't hide the blunt truth of the government of the court's decision. The Rwanda plan was shredded. Out of that humiliation bubbles the Plan B, a treaty with Rwanda and a willingness to confront, albeit without the details of precisely how, the European Convention on Human Rights. The temporary challenge of illegal migration to richer countries globally is huge, but the UK is not alone in considering new options and wondering if decades-old conventions can survive. But critics of the government, from its own former ministers to opposition parties, claim Rishi Sunak has made a difficult situation harder. He remains determined to be seen to take it on, though he concludes millions wanting to. And he knows plenty of Conservative MPs
does. But tonight, the prospect of live routes on planes to Rwanda anytime soon looks unlikely. The pickets of legislation, courts and conventions towering around it. It means the issue is likely to remain live in the Conservative Party, across Parliament and around the country as we head into the year of a general election campaign. BBC News.
And news was read by Tom Cypress.
This fungus, this devious organism, it didn't just change my life, it changed me.
A new psychological horror series on BBC Radio 4.
It infects the human body by snipping scalps inside immunity cells.
A fast-spreading infestation.
That way they enter the bloodstream, migrate to the brain, and wreak havoc.
And a race to be believed.
You've seen things. There was no mold.
You're getting very, very sick.
Spores. Next Monday to Friday at 2:15 on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds. Now for brand new comedy.
This is Glenmore's Almanac, a show all about famous dates in history and what I was doing on those days, starring me, Glenmore! Yes, this is Glenmore's Almanac. Almanac? Almanac? Well, I probably should have worked this out earlier. This show is all about dates. People obsess over dates in history, the significance of dates, the meaning of numbers and ages. Take Friday the 13th, for instance, or the 27 Club. People obsess over those. The idea that these artists mysteriously died at the age of 27. Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix. Personally, me, I'm more intrigued by the 93 Club. Ronald Reagan, Christopher Lee. What happened there? Gerald Ford, all mysteriously died at the age of 93. There's something suspicious at play there. Take any date from history, something fascinating happened. Let's look through a big book of dates. Okay, let's see. We've got April 25th. How about that? Hubble Space Telescope was launched. Birthday of Al Pacino. Al Pacino? Al Pacino. We'll work it out. Now, next week I'm going to be looking at April 29th. What happened April 29th? So we've got 1784, premiere of Mozart's Violin Sonata in B flat. 1967, Respect by Aretha Franklin was released. 1995, longest sausage ever made in Ontario. 1952, conspiracy theorist David Icke was born. Or was he? Alfred Hitchcock died. Famously always made cameos in his own movies. Will he be making an appearance tonight? I hope not. What else happened? Captain Cook thought he discovered Australia, only to find it been occupied for quite some time. Joni Mitchell met a future husband, and in 2011, it was the royal wedding of Kate and William. Now, cast your minds back. For the royal family, 2011 was a different time. Queen was still alive, William and Harry were on good terms, and the only time anyone called Meghan had upset the royals was when Prince Philip didn't enjoy Transformers 2. And they all loved Emily Maitland, that nice lady from Newsnight. It was a huge day, but what's it got to do with me? I don't really have any interest in royalty. Though a lot of people assume from my accent that I do. They think that because my voice has got some sort of association with HRH. That's Harry Potter. Let me assume that from my voice. If you try to place my accent, by the way, I was born, Catskinston. But it annoys me that people assume I'm from a posh background. I'm not. I've got no idea where this stupid accent came from. People accuse me of being posh all the time, and it's not true. It's not actually. I swear to the next person who calls me posh, I'm going to give up and put my head in the arc. That's no mean. The accent takes a long time to heat up. Because the royal wedding was massive, though. Whether you like it or not, royalty is everywhere you go. Even just the other night, I had a few drinks at a pub around the corner at the Duke of York. They've still got a picture of Andrew outside. I got IDs, which was off-brand. It was a big event for me. Big event for me because I was working as a journalist at the time, so I was going to be covering it. Now, I was the newsreader at a radio station in Sheffield. I'd wanted to be a newsreader my entire life. When I was a kid, I had a big poster of Lizo Mazimba on my wall. All the other kids at school made fun of me for that. Made fun of me for other reasons as well, like when I had my 10th birthday party at Debenhams. But I didn't care. Every night I'd get out of the bath, I'd be stood in front of the mirror using my hairbrush as a microphone, bopping about. I wasn't singing, I was saying stuff like, it could make sites like this a thing of the past. Classic 10-year-old behaviour, Well, we had Heroes Day at school. Everyone had to go to school dressed as their favourite hero. Everyone went as like pop stars and footballers, not me. I took it seriously. I wanted to be a journalist. I went to school dressed as a Trevor McDonald. Should not have done that. I should not have done that. Got sent home from school that day, actually. My teacher had gone as Aretha Franklin. She said it was actually incredibly dis-R-E-S-P-E-C. No, never mind. Now, I found newsreaders very strangely intimidating when I was growing up. I'm not sure if you found it intimidating. I'm not sure if you had this as well. When I was a kid, I used to be too scared to be undressed in the living room because I thought Simon McCoy could see me. Because, you know, my dad used to run around all the time. But it suited me. Someone who always wanted a job where I just never have to give my own opinions, I'd never upset anyone, just a serious job, keep my head down. I wanted a job like that. Maybe a brave job, you know, something like a fireman and not firefighter, sorry. You know, maybe like an office job, you know, work my way up to chairfighter, anything like that. Just wanted a job where I could keep my head down, you know. I was so formal as a kid. I never wanted to get involved in any arty-barty, that's short for Argentina, Argentina. This is how formal I was as a kid, right? I used to say, Father Longlegs. I know, instead of just that vicar with the long legs. I was a being a journalist is a perfect job for someone like me. You never give your own views as a newsreader. You've got to balance out other people. If you interview a left-wing guest, you've got to balance it out. You've then got to interview a right-wing guest. And like once, for instance, I was interviewing a woman whose husband had gone missing. She was really, really sad. So I then had to interview a woman whose husband had gone missing, and she was fine. So she managed to get quite a lot done in that time, actually. It was a perfect job for a timid person like me, and a perfect job for a lazy person like me. You can get away with such lazy behaviour as a newsreader. This is true. I'm not the only newsreader who used to do this, but to put it plainly, the news changes every hour, but the weather generally doesn't. So I hated having to do the weather. I hated doing it. So what I do with my bulletins is I'd get into work at 5 a.m, I'd record me doing the weather, and each hour I'd do the news live, and then I would just press a button that would play my old weather. And it means it saves a couple of minutes. But what I forget is that obviously at 5 a.m. when I recorded that weather, that was usually the first words I'd said that day. So it sounded dreadful. So by the time we got to midday and my voice was warmed up, the news would sort of sound a bit like this. The suspect is due in court on Thursday. Now it's time for the weather.
It's going to be hot but cloudy this afternoon, and showers after highs of 5 degrees.
It was a dream come true when I got my first job as a roving reporter at a radio station. I thought I could travel the world, learn new languages. Before that, I couldn't really speak any other languages. You know, I could sort of speak some French. You know, I could sort of say like, hi, my name is Glenn. I would like 2 baguettes, please. But apparently that is still English.